We're getting a first look into how the 2020 census data will shape the country for the next 10 years. The census counted over 331 million people living in the United States, and California remains the most populous state and Wyoming the least. Now, the U.S. population grew by 7.4% in the past 10 years. That's the slowest growth rate since the 1930s. And notably, these numbers have an impact on how Washington will work. NBC News political correspondent Ali Vitali joins us now to talk us through how this all impacts Congress. Ali, good morning. So those population changes will actually have an effect on states either gaining or losing seats. We mentioned that California remains the most populous state, but due to some changes there, it's going to be affected because of this. So what does this mean for the 2022 midterm elections? And tell us who's gaining seats.
So in terms of who's gaining seats, we should start with Texas. They gained 2. Colorado, Florida, Montana, North Carolina, and Oregon then all gained 1 seat. This is basically a redividing of the 435-person congressional pie. These census numbers contribute directly to the way that Americans are represented in Congress and how many representatives they have there. So you're seeing the map up front. The one state I would draw your attention to is Texas. A lot of experts who cover this stuff say Texas probably should have gained 3 seats. That's what they were expecting. But instead, you're seeing on the map, they only gained 2 in this census, which is leading people to wonder if maybe there was an undercounting of Hispanic populations in Texas and maybe writ large across the board. You also have to consider from this census, we're learning the regions where the population has grown over the last 10 years. The Sun Belt really stood to gain from that, more so than the growth rates in the Northeast and the Midwest. And that also translates to political power. When you see states like Texas and Florida gaining congressional seats, now if you look at the top 4 states that have the most congressional seats, Texas and Florida are 2 of them. So clearly power is centralizing in those 2 regions.
And now, Ali, which states are losing seats, and is that going to impact who controls Congress?
It's going to impact who controls Congress eventually. All of this is going to eventually contribute to redistricting and redrawing of maps. It means that some Congress people are going to lose their seats. Others are going to see their districts mushed together with other districts. It's really going to change the face of these states at a very deep level when you talk about how these congressional House seats are going to be done. But look on the map. You see California, for the first time in its state's history, lost a congressional seat. Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York also all lost seats. Here's a really crazy fact, though, that we learned from the census officials yesterday when they were rolling out this data. New York might not have lost that congressional seat if they had had 89 more people counted in their total population and all of the other states' populations remained the same. Instead, Minnesota, which was expected initially to lose a congressional seat, got to keep theirs because they basically ranked higher than New York in population totals. So really, all of this does operate on the margins. The other thing that operates on the margins right now, as you guys well know, is Congress itself. The margins there are really slim. And when you talk about in midterms traditionally, the party that has the White House tends to typically see losses in Congress. You already hear House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy talking about how he feels bullish about Republicans being able to retake the House. In a lot of these redistricting maps, Republicans do have control of the way these maps are drawn. Think specifically in places like Texas, North Carolina, and Florida. All of that is going to be really important when we actually hit the midterms in terms of who becomes vulnerable as incumbents and also where Republicans have chances to make gains in districts that Democrats might have flipped, be it in 2018 or 2020, and they might want to hold on to it in 2022, but the maps are just going to look different.
Ali, those 89 New Yorkers were probably down at their new beach house in Florida, where many people fled during the pandemic, which leads me to my next and last question, which is that this data was collected during a pandemic, which made canvassing difficult. And it also happened under a presidential administration that actually went to court several times trying to limit the scope of this count. Did that affect the final count at all? What do we hear about, the confidence in these numbers?
Savannah, the pandemic, the fact that the Trump administration initially extended the deadline for this census, then said that they were capping it off earlier than they expected. And of course, the census itself has been delayed, not to mention the fact that you had historic wildfires out west. You had a hurricane season that ravaged the coasts. And then, of course, the summer of civil unrest. There were multiple crises layered on top of each other over the course of this year, We've been covering them throughout that duration, but through it all, the census workers were out there trying to get a fair count of who is in this country. You got to think about it this way. They started sending out forms for people to fill out their census in mid-March. A week later, a lot of states and governments started shutting down because of COVID. So it really did change the way that they were gathering their information. It's why we're seeing these numbers come out sort of on a delay, but they have told us repeatedly, census officials as well as Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo yesterday, that they are very confident in the quality of these numbers, guys.
Ali Vitali, really, really interesting stuff here. Thank you so much.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.